Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Through the Fire. I am your host, Ryan Wickline, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He is a social psychologist who focuses on motivation and emotions, and he's an author, Mr. J.D. Pincus. How you doing today, J.D.?
I'm doing great. Good to be here, Ryan.
Hey, I'm glad to have you. I'm kind of fascinated to what you found out on how people were motivated.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I've been working on that for a long time, probably like 30 years. So I hopefully I've got something to say about it.
Yeah. So the number one question the audience is probably wondering, who is J.D. Pincus?
Sure. I'll give you a little bit of my background. So I'm a social psychologist. I got my PhD at the University of Connecticut back in the 90s. And in the 90s, it was the height of the cognitive revolution, which is, the sort of mood there and the philosophy of the psychology world was that what we're thinking about right now is what really matters. And there was almost nothing written that was relevant or contemporary about motivation or emotion. If it was talking about emotions, it was usually some sort of nuisance factor that would get in the way of your, cognition, your rational thinking. And that didn't sound right to me at all. I knew from my own experience in my life and the people I knew that people did a lot of things because they were emotionally involved, emotionally motivated. They had emotional needs that were unmet, and that would lead them to do all sorts of things, both good and bad. And it had absolutely nothing to do with rationality. Rationality, it seemed, was something that was sort of there to justify and make sense of what you did, and kind of come up with the explanations and rationalizations for people, including yourself. And that didn't really fit the mold in those days. So I ended up having to do my research in a different lab entirely. It was not in the psychology building. At a place which had all this sort of emotion equipment, sort of psychophysiological stuff, hidden cameras, all kinds of like really cool stuff that I could use to measure people's emotional responses to things, and did that work. Kind of banded together with some folks who kind of believed the same way I did, even though we were a tiny little minority. And lo and behold, decades later, it's been the decade of the brain, and in the intervening time, the sort of Nobel Prize that went to Daniel Kahneman for discovering behavioral economics, which basically makes the point that we don't make decisions rationally, we make them emotionally. The invention of the fMRI, which is basically shown, in the brain, that how this thing unfolds and how, depending on how we're feeling emotionally, what our emotional needs are, that determines entirely how we perceive events and how it determines the thoughts we have. It determines the logic that we use. So really, they had it exactly backwards in the 90s and 80s. They thought that our thoughts come first, and that leads to our choices, and then maybe there's some sort of emotion that goes along with it. Turns out our emotions are first. Our emotional needs drive everything, and what we think about is really just a function of that.
Huh. So what led you to start studying human motivation?
So as I mentioned, before grad school, actually, before I was just starting out in before even undergrad, I was in a band. It was a hardcore band, and we were having some success. We played very emotional music, a lot of a lot of sort of mosh pit type stuff, and it was all just raw emotion. And I had a decision to make. We actually had some gigs lined up at CBGB in New York and Madame Wong's in LA, and I was like, do I try to become like a rock star, or do I kind of follow the path which I sort of knew I should be following, which was to kind of go and learn. So I ended up taken that path, but it kind of stayed with me. That sort of idea, like what the band's name was, controlled aggression. Sort of emotion was all over it. And I kind of, when I got to grad school and heard that it was like, well, emotions don't really matter. Who really cares about that? The last person who talked about that was Freud. And he was crazy. And it's like, no. Like it didn't sit right with me. I knew my father's research. He was a neurologist who became famous for his work on violence. He ended up doing assessments on a lot of serial killers and other folks like that, and finding that people who were repeatedly violent had problems in their brain. They had problems in their emotion centers. They had dysregulation. Their frontal lobes couldn't regulate their behavior. So the emotions basically took over. I knew that from growing up with him. And so none of this stuff sat right with me. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to, go a different way. And it's interesting. I got through school faster than I think anybody else because they didn't know what to do with me. I was clearly not going to be someone who was going to be co-authoring on their papers. I was not going to be formed in their model. So they basically graduated me and said, see you later. So that was good for me. So I ended up going out and working for a major insurance company. I ran research and product development there for a few years. Kind of trying out all the different statistical techniques I knew and, the things I knew about human motivation and emotion, trying to help them with their marketing, help them with their stickiness. And we were very successful there. And then ended up going to consulting, did that for about 18 years and, worked on major brands all over the country, all over the world. You name a brand, I probably worked on it either as a client or as one of their competitors, and kind of diagnosing what's going on in terms of the marketplace and who is motivating who and how and what's the opportunity. So I did that for a while. Then I had the opportunity later in my career to basically take these ideas I'd been working on and connect with some folks who had like some development resources and some funding and some connections, and basically turn it into a business in and of itself. Really, instead of trying to market products, now it's about helping people. And we're trying to give people the sort of empowerment that they need to be in touch with their emotional needs so that they can actually take control of their future in a meaningful way. So it's sort of taken the best of what came out of, the neuro world, the marketing world, and all the rest, and saying, how do we actually help people with these insights?
That's funny that you were talking about that you used to work with a lot of in the marketing department, and how much do those companies use people like you to elicit emotions in their ads?
Yeah, so that was a big thing for a while. They sort of had their heyday probably 10 years ago where, Nielsen Neuroscience had a ton of clients. They had labs in every major city. My daughter worked for one of these places. I worked for these places. I used them. I consulted to them, doing, EEG research, basically looking at showing people ads, looking what's going on in their brain moment to moment, looking at skin conductance, even doing MRIs of their brains, showing them ads and things, and kind of seeing like which things triggered the nucleus accumbens, which is sort of a dopamine mediated reward center. What makes that light up. So that kind of crested, I think, at some point, because I think at a certain point, you kind of you figure out what are the things that are sort of the signals that light up, people's attention and get them interested. And it's kind of like a parlor trick at the end of the day. It's sort of like I can construct a movie trailer or an ad that's going to get your attention, that's going to get you to focus on the brand name and et cetera. But there's not a lot of insight there. There's not a lot of like why. There's more sort of moment to moment, like I can make a loud noise and get your attention. I can show fire and sex or babies and puppies and that'll get your attention. But I haven't done anything in terms of addressing your emotional needs. So that's why I felt like it was time for me to kind of break with that world and start to really focus on things that matter. And that's sort of where I came up with my theory.
Yeah. What was your breakthrough moment that led you to develop your own model on human motivation?
Yeah. So I'd been playing with these ideas for a long time, and it really bothered me, going through school. I remember this whole, module in grad school talking about the mini theories. They call them the mini theories because there's a million of these little theories that talk about the need for, fill in the blank, the need for affiliation, the need for, immersion, the need for safety, the need for belonging. Like, there's all these needs. Like, how come there's no model that integrates them all? There was, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's great, except Maslow collected no data. Maslow basically just interviewed people that he considered to be self-actualized. And he just sort of was like, from pressing it to his forehead, he came up with, okay, we have safety needs. On top of that, there's belonging needs. On top of that, there's esteem, there's self-actualization, and there's transcendence. Great. There's also a bunch of other needs that he didn't talk about. He didn't talk about the need for justice. He didn't talk about the need for ethics. He didn't talk about the need for immersion in the moment, like Chuck and Mahali, like the need for flow. He didn't talk about the need for autonomy. He didn't talk about the need for achievement. So, and there's all these needs that other people talked about, and yet there was no model that could make sense of them all. So in my work, we ended up doing a lot of, qualitative work, a lot of quantitative work, large scale surveys, and did some factor analysis, which is basically looking for, clumps of meaning in the data. And we found was there were a series of needs that kept coming out that were related to each other. So there were a bunch of needs that seemed to fit within the self. There were a bunch of needs that seemed to involve other people. There were a bunch of needs that seemed to be sort of material concerns about, work and money and objects, and a bunch of concerns that had to do with things you can't see, things like justice and ethics and purpose, values, principles. And lo and behold, I did a bunch of research, and I found that there are at least 12 world systems of philosophy, religion, psychology, many of them very ancient, that say that there are 4 domains of human life. There's the self, and then there's the social, sort of like what I need for myself, then what my relationships with other people are about. The material world of, money and things and objects and work and play, and the spiritual world of immaterial, the things you can't see, the things that are concepts and principles. In every one of those 12, they propose that there's a hierarchy that goes from the self to the material to the social to the spiritual. And I'm like, okay, this aligns perfectly with my data. And then there were a bunch within each one. And there I borrowed Aristotle's insight, where he looked at modes of existence. So he said that things can either exist in a kind of state of pure potential, they can be becoming, or they can be in actuality. And he used the example of a pile of lumber. So Home Depot drops off some lumber in front of your house. At that point, it could turn into a lot of different things. You have an architect or a design, and you're going to build a shed, let's say. And so now you begin kind of, hammering things together, screwing things together, cutting, etc. Now it's in a process of becoming. So it's gone from pure potential to becoming. Then finally you have a shed, you put your lawnmower in, lock the door. Now it's in a state of actualization. So those 3 modes of existence, I basically crossed that by the 4 domains of life. And lo and behold, we had 12 cells, and those 12 cells accounted for every single one of these many theories of motivation that had ever been proposed, and made sense of them in a way that no one ever had before. Because before, it was just sort of like people throw out words, just more and more jargon without any sense of what, have we covered all of the logical possibilities? Now we can say that we have. So it's cool. And there's a hierarchy within each one of them. So let's say within the self, it starts with the need for psychological safety. Like I need to feel like I'm basically safe. If I feel like I'm safe, I can move up a level to the experiential, where I can now sort of be myself. I can sort of come out as who I really am, and kind of, use my style, talk in my own voice, all that stuff. If I can do that, and I have foundational, safety is met, I can be my authentic self. That's my first opportunity to actually achieve my full potential as a person. You can't achieve your full potential as a person if you're trying to sound like somebody else, if you're imitating somebody else. You're not actually being your authentic self. So you can see there's sort of a hierarchy that builds. That same logic extends to all the other domains. So in the material domain, I got to feel like I have control. I got to feel like I have autonomy. I have permission and ability to get things done, right? That gives me the kind of fuel to get started. Then I can immerse myself in the work. I can really get into it, like sort of avoid distraction, really lose myself in it. Imagine a painter or a sculptor, like they're totally focused and they look up and they've created something amazing. That's where success occurs, right? So that's the top level, the aspiration, the actualization. In the social domain, it starts with inclusion. I got to feel like I'm part of my, my tribe, my family, my community, accepted, belonging. If I do, then I can begin to form deeper one-on-one relationships within that community. That's where caring occurs, sort of mutual give and take. If I do that for my lifetime, then I'll be accorded a certain amount of respect, validation, affirmation. People will sort of look up to you, and that's the top level. In the spiritual domain, it starts with justice, right? That good is rewarded, bad is punished. And if you don't have that, you're not really going much further in terms of the spiritual domain. If you do have that, you can start to think about applying those principles to like restraining self-interest in the gray areas of life. What claims that you're making about your product or service are exaggerations. Are you being transparent about your pricing? Are you being, forthcoming about, are being totally honest about all of those questions are ethical questions. If you have that in place, finally, you have the first opportunity for kind of spiritual transcendence, where you're talking about defining a purpose that goes beyond yourself, beyond the material, beyond even the people you know and love. Now we're talking about a purpose that is cosmic and beyond any of that. So, for instance, respecting all life, would be at that level, regardless of whether or not you have a relationship with that life. So that's basically the model.
Nice. So each one's got its own little plane, like quadrant, and it goes up a pyramid then, instead of where everything was lumped together in one lump thing, like a Maslow's.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you can think of it as a pyramid. I mean, and what I like about it, like a lot of people show Maslow's hierarchy as a pyramid, but it's just one side of a pyramid.
Yeah.
It's trying to do all the heavy lifting. Mine is a four-sided pyramid where the self is opposite the social, the material is opposite the spiritual, and there's predictions you can then make about what's adjacent and what's opposite, and are there trade-offs between them. So, and a lot of that work I've done and published, and it actually holds up really well. So I think we're onto something big, that we basically sort of cracked the code of like the sort of deep structure of reality. And we're finding that it's incredibly useful. It's very useful for helping people get control of their lives and to kind of assess where they are in terms of their unmet needs, so that they can prioritize what it is that they need to do to be happy.
Yeah. Nice. So it kind of sounds like it's kind of like how the Greeks and everybody, and like a lot of the spiritual people have brought out like virtues. Like it sounds like it's a lot of the virtue stuff where you can lump it together and to see how high you can climb.
Exactly. And what I like about that is that the virtues were sort of neglected as sort of like a anachronism, like who's to say what a virtue is. Like this was the whole argument in social science, that we can't judge somebody else's virtues. Their culture might say that killing people at random is the highest good, and that's their culture, and we can't judge it because that's sort of cultural imperialism. I think that's a bunch of bull. And the truth is that there is a difference between right and wrong that is objective. There are natural principles, there's natural law, and the concept that we're not in a position to judge any of that is, I think, just incredibly naive. And it's a great way to kind of get out of trouble quickly. It's not actually realistic at all. So I like to look at it as the virtues are basically justice, ethics, and purpose. They're kind of overlay on that side of the pyramid. And there's a hierarchy to them. And, Lawrence Kohlberg described that hierarchy in terms of development, and Piaget did as well, that basically kids, when they're young, whoever's in charge makes the rules. And if you follow the rules, you're good. If you break the rules, you're bad, right? That's sort of the justice level. Then you get a little older and you realize that there's exceptions, that people are not always consistent, that there's a higher principle involved. Should this guy Heinz, should he steal the chemotherapy for his wife who's dying from the pharmacist who is overcharging for it? It's like, yeah, stealing is wrong, but is it okay for him to do that anyway because there's a higher principle involved? It starts to kind of get at some of those kinds of concepts. Then you get to that top level, and it's like, okay, is there a higher purpose than any of that stuff? Forget, who Heinz knows and who's sick and everything else. Is there a thing that he should be, making his North Star in his life? So to me, that those are all speak to virtues, right? They're all
Yeah.
sort of different levels of virtues, and they're different levels of abstraction and development. And I think there is a kind of a natural progression that people can make, but don't always make, that goes from meeting their needs for safety at the very bottom of the self, all the way up, all of the different levels, all the way up to that transcendence at the highest level of the spiritual domain. If they can do that, then they've sort of become fully human. I think it's pretty rare for people to ever get there, but that's at least the goal.
Yeah. You created the Agile Brain assessment. Can you explain how it works?
Sure. So basically what it is taking these concepts, these 12 things, right, and turning them into pictures. Because what we know from neuroscience is that people have an emotional response to images before they have a cognitive response, before they can kind of influence it cognitively, rationally, kind of bias their response. So what we do is we show people images really fast, one every second, and there's no time to think. You literally have to just respond just by tapping with your finger when an image comes up that matches the prompt. And the prompt is something like, when I think about my current situation, I wish I could feel a little bit more this. And then we show you a bunch of positive images, and those images correspond to these 12 concepts, right? And you go through all that, and people say, I don't know why I picked what I picked. It seemed like it was at random, probably didn't mean anything. And then we show them a negative prompt. We say, thinking about my current situation, I wish I could feel less. And then we show negative images also tied to those same 12, right? So it's sort of the polarity of wanting more of the good or less of the bad in each one of those areas. Same thing, they go through, make their choices. The whole thing's done in 3 minutes. It spits out right back to you a profile of what your unmet needs are. And people say repeatedly, it's like scarily accurate. And the reason we know it is that we've done this now in big corporations. I did this in the biotech industry. We asked people about, working in this place, I wish I could feel a little bit more this, I wish I could feel a bit less that. It predicted whether or not people quit their jobs there, 80% accuracy, just this 3-minute exercise, which there's no other thing in social science I've ever seen that comes anywhere near that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is, first of all, we're getting at their emotional gut reaction. The other piece of it, I think, is the fact that no one can be held responsible or liable for what they choose on a thing that's shown for you for a second. So it kind of frees you to tell the truth. And I think, honestly, most assessments aren't going to ask questions like, do you feel like you're being stabbed in the back? But that's an image we'll show you, and say, I wish I could feel less of that at work. If I'm picking that, I'm probably got one foot out the door, like this is not a healthy culture for me. So that's how we came up with it. And it works great. And we're actually using this all around the world now. We're using this in Ukraine and in Kyiv with the public school system there. We're using it in Nigeria. We're using it with college students all across the US. And trying to bring it to as many people as we can.
Nice. How can understanding our emotional needs improve mental health, relationships, and workplace productivity?
Yeah. So if I could understand your unmet emotional needs, that could be a pretty powerful thing, right? If I know, for instance, I've got a team of people I work with, and one person is all about, individual success, like they want to get promoted, right? Somebody else is there, it's all about inclusion. Like that person really just wants to kind of have a good time and feel like they're part of the team. Somebody else, it's really about them wanting to be different. It's wanting them to kind of show how they're different and special and authentic, and they've got their unique perspective. Somebody else, it's all about the ethics of what we're doing and the morality. Are we making sure that all the decisions as a team that we make are adhering to? So basically, you just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of a bunch of different motivational profiles. And anybody who's worked in a team has seen this, right? You've experienced this. Like there's people who are just there to kind of, goof around. There's people who are there who are like, dead serious and want to meet their goals and get achievement, get recognition. There's people there who are there to kind of put on the brakes and make sure that we're not going too far, not going too fast. There's all of these kind of different styles. Those styles reflect different sets of emotional needs. If I know as the team leader what you're after, I'm going to have a lot easier time managing that group and being able to kind of give people what they need. So the person who wants recognition, I give them an assignment that's going to get them recognition, right? That's going to lead to, everybody standing and applauding for them and being, and they can put their name on it. For somebody who just wants to be part of the group, make sure that the group is welcoming and open and friendly, and that everyone feels included, and that we doesn't split into cliques, that sort of thing. So there are very direct consequences for leadership and for culture in terms of knowing exactly what it is that people are looking for.
Yeah. What inspired you to write your book, Emotionally Agile Brain, Mastering the 12 Emotional Needs That Drive Us?
So I'd had all these ideas for a long time. I developed the assessment. Everything was good. But what I found was, it's just like these conversations. It's like, it's a complicated story, it's a multi-leveled story. And I was thinking, what I really need to do is to put this in writing. And so what I did was I kind of talk about in the first few chapters, like what the problem is, which we talked about a little bit, like, marketing companies taking advantage of these insights, behavioral economics. I mean, it's a crime what's happened with that, where these insights immediately turned into like magic tricks to try to get people to buy more stuff.
Yeah.
And the truth is that nobody stopped and said, we really should be harnessing these things to help people live better lives. So I kind of start there. Then I go into talking about how I came up with the structure, the sort of 4x3, the 12 needs. And then I kind of talk about each one of the needs. Each one gets its own chapter. There's a section of the book for the self, the material, the social, the spiritual. And then at the end of the book, basically talk about, well, what happens next? Where does it all go? What's the sort of next level of human evolution? As an individual and as a species, like how do we actually, meet these needs and then kind of get to the next level, which is, I think, defined by boundaries collapsing. That's why I like a pyramid model, because at the top of the pyramid, there's no more difference, right? It all comes to a point. And there, whatever I'm doing to feel safe is also helping other people. Whatever I'm doing for my own success is also helping other people, ethically. It's also, following a higher purpose. So that's sort of where I take the argument ultimately. And that's it. It's 300 and something, 79 pages of that.
What was probably the most challenging part for you while you're writing it?
I think it's just, it takes a while, and I think, I guess as a writer, it's sort of committing to a structure and a pattern that you're happy with and kind of just executing, just kind of, the blocking and tackling, getting through all the different pieces. Then I went back and kind of said, okay, I think it's missing this. And I'd kind of go back and add a section, across all of the 12, but you really have to be able to kind of stand back and see the whole thing. And I think having the discipline to kind of, first of all, keep your butt in the seat and write all this stuff. This was all before ChatGPT. I like to point out, like you could crank out something, very quickly these days with no work, but this was before all that. So it was quite a bit of work. And also the sourcing, like, the references, making sure everything is like very carefully referenced to scientific articles, because I didn't want this to be like another self-help book that's just sort of a bunch of like word salad and, just trust me, like I wanted this to be well-rounded, like every step of the way. Like this is not just a bunch of sort of fly-by-night BS. This is actually based in real people's experiences and real science.
Yeah, a lot of research went into it too. So
yeah,
you wanted to make sure you showed everybody that.
Yeah.
What are some common emotional needs that people overlook, and how do they impact our lives?
Yeah, I think, there's a tension in a lot of emotional needs. Like if I want to feel included, right, in a group, then there's a pressure for me maybe to, rein in sort of my uniqueness and my authentic self. So there's a bit of a tension there. There's a little bit of a tension between sort of caring for other people and individual success, right? If I want to, kind of go all out on pushing my individual success, that's going to come at the expense of time I spend with family, let's say. So and that's why I have these sort of tensions built into the model. It's sort of like, if you're going to go hard on this side, you're probably pulling energy from that side. And I think you could make that argument. I mean, that's one of the beauties of the AgileBrain technique, is that in 3 minutes, we've got a map of exactly what's going on with you. The ones that are settled are areas where you don't have a lot of conflict. The ones that are lit up, there's probably some conflict going on. There's some tension going on there. So, we've seen this with successful salespeople who are like, they're all about success. They're all about immersion and autonomy, but they've got problems in the social domain, and they may have problems in the spiritual domain. They could even have problems in the self domain. It's all about sort of trade-offs. So it's hard to say in general, like what's an unmet need that people have. It's like everybody's got their own individual profile, and the complexity of it is pretty enormous. I actually did the math on this. We've got 24 different things. So 12 positive needs, 12 negative needs. The factorial of 24 is something like, 600 sextillion, which is more than the number of gallons of water that exist on Earth. So just to give you a sense for how much diversity there can be in these profiles, there's a lot. So I guess hopefully that answers that.
Yeah. How does your model address challenges like imposter syndrome and self-doubt? And what advice do you have for overcoming these?
So imposter syndrome is an interesting one. I talk about it a lot in the book. Really what it is it's to me, it's in the self domain. It's around sort of psychological insecurity. If I feel like I don't really have, what I need to be confident, then when I try to express myself in my authenticity, this is on the next level, there's going to be that voice that's saying, yeah, you're not really qualified. You're not really, why do you get to speak in your authentic voice? Are you sure that you're up to this? And then it affects the next level of potential. When you want to become your best self, you want to kind of take your authenticity and drive it toward, becoming a master of something. It's that haunting kind of like, yeah, you don't really deserve to be here. You don't really deserve this success. So I think it's kind of grounded in psychological safety issues, but it shows up primarily in authenticity and potential as problems. It's sort of ways that people hold themselves back. And it's been described as sort of a fear of failure in some cases, or a fear of flying, or, whatever it is. But really what it is, I think, is a basic insecurity. And everybody, I mean, if you're not psychotic, I think everybody experiences that a little bit, why should I have been able to write this book? Why should anybody listen to me? And I think you have to really, really become self-actualized. You have to push through that and say, at a certain point, I don't really care. Maybe I'm not the best. Maybe I'll never be the best. Maybe there's a million people smarter than me, or a billion people smarter than me. It doesn't matter. I got something to say. I'm going to say it. And that's what it takes. And actually Maslow talked about that. He said there had to be like a certain arrogance that goes along with self-actualization, because at a certain point you've got to stop caring what other people think. And that's healthy ultimately. Because if you really believe in your heart that what you're saying is right and true, just go ahead and say it.
Yeah. How can people get over that self-doubt?
I think it's practice, It's like anything. It's like learning an instrument. You can't just will it into existence. It's a behavioral thing. It's just practice. It's like you do it over and over and over again. And then this was one of the old social psychology theories, that self-perception theory. You see yourself doing things, and your mind subconsciously concludes, hey, I'm pretty good at this, or I can do this competently. And it's not something that you say to yourself as a mantra. It's something that happens, unconsciously. but powerfully, where you say, okay, I'm going to kind of lay down these grooves in my brain in terms of the neurons, associated with public speaking or with, writing or with whatever it is, communicating my ideas. And you do that enough, you just keep doing it. And that's the thing. It's like stand-up comedy. Like, it's incredibly frightening at first, I think, and it can be that way your entire career, but they push through it. And they don't get rid of the nervousness, by the way. The best performers, they stay nervous. They stay nervous the whole time until they're in the moment, because that's sort of fueling the passion and the artistry. You can't will that away. Like, self-doubt is fine, I think, as long as it doesn't stop you.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of hit on it. How closely related is fear and self-doubt?
Yeah, that's another name for psychological insecurity is fear or anxiety. Yeah, self-doubt is about fear. It's all about fear. If I'm kind of afraid of losing something, that's what fear is, then, losing my safety, losing my position, losing my reputation, whatever it is, it's a fear of loss. You have to kind of be able to manage that and control it and be like, at a certain point, I'm not going to let that make the decisions for me. I'm going to make decisions, and I'm going to just have to feel that fear and do it anyway. In fact, there's a book in the 70s called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. It was a great title because it really captures, that the goal should never be to eliminate fear. There's people who don't feel fear at all, and they have terrible lives. I talk about this in the book. There's this woman who had this condition where her amygdala became calcified. It's a weird brain condition that people can get, and she truly could not feel fear. Problem with that was that she trusted everybody. Then all of those little signals you get about this guy's shady, like, she didn't pick up on any of that. She got mugged repeatedly. People would call her over in the park in the dark and be like, "Hey, come on over here," and she'd be like, "Oh, okay," like, no fear. And people would think, that must be nice to have no fear. It's not good. It's not good at all.
It's kind of the opposite right there with that story.
Yeah.
Like, one thing that I learned about it was that our brain is programmed to sense that fear and to hold us back to kind of more survival mode.
Yeah, exactly. And that's shown in a lot of the research. Basically, there's an approach mode and a withdrawal mode. And you can see it in the brain waves. Like, when you see more activity in the right hemisphere, that's associated with a approach, and or is it the other way around? I can't remember. Anyway, it's one side is associated with approach, the other one's associated with withdrawal, and it makes sense. I mean, it's sort of like fight and flight. We have a decision to always make. Am I going to move toward it, or am I going to move away from it? And that's sort of what we have in our model. The sort of, half of the motives are expressed in terms of, or all of the motives are expressed in terms of their promotion potential and their prevention potential. So I want more of the good, I want less of the bad. That's basically, approach avoidance. Both are very strong motivators.
Yeah. What is the biggest takeaway you want readers to take away from your book?
Biggest takeaway, I'd say, is that there's a lot of misery in the world right now, and there probably has been for some time. It's very sort of well known and well documented right now, and I think there's a lot of sadness and people feeling left out and feeling, for whatever reasons, dissatisfied. And I think there's a way. And one of the things I don't like is, like, in the mental health business, it seems like all roads lead to meditation and journaling. Like, it doesn't matter what condition you come in, doesn't matter what your problem is, that's the prescription every single time. It's going to be, meditate, be mindful, journal about it, talk to a therapist about it, and that's it. That's our bag of tricks. To me, that's not very satisfying. And to me, the real work is to find out what your real needs are. Like, what needs do I have that are not being fulfilled? And find ways to fulfill them. And maybe it's not in the way that you originally thought. Like maybe if I'm feeling like I'm not recognized at work, maybe you've got this need for recognition. You can go get recognition other ways. You can go get recognition by volunteering. You can get recognition, in your neighborhood. You can get recognition in your family. You can get recognition, through athletics. There's a lot of different ways you can get the needs that you want fulfilled. And in fact, the more ways that you can fulfill the needs, the more stable you'll be. So if you kind of put all your eggs in one basket and like this, one relationship is everything, it's like you're probably going to be disappointed because you're not diversifying your portfolio. You got to think about, I've got these needs, I've got these 12 needs. Some of them are met, some of them aren't met. If I can start to isolate which ones are not met, then I can start thinking creatively about how to meet those needs. And that's going to lead to general well-being and happiness. And it's a very different way of looking at things. It's not putting a diagnostic label on it. It's not saying you have anxiety, you have depression, you've experienced trauma. Instead of that, it's saying everybody has these 12 needs. Everybody has some unmet needs, at least some of the time. And we can do this assessment. We can tell you exactly what they are, and we can start to talk to you about how to meet them.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like when you're talking about that, like how we have so many cookie cutter systems, even in the medical field and the personal development field, that it tries to lump everybody into certain one category.
Yeah, exactly. I know. It's like it was my mantra for a while. Like all roads lead to mindfulness. It's like, well, yeah, as a technique, that's great. It's great, right? But it doesn't address the core problem. It's sort of pretending there is no problem. It's saying just tune it out and just focus on the moment. It's like, great, but how do I actually solve the problem I'm experiencing? Like that's what I'm addressing. It's sort of reality based. It's saying you got a problem. Not everybody in the world is a nice person. Not every situation is fair. What do you do to get your needs met? And maybe it's not the first thing you thought. Maybe it's something else. But your needs can be met, at least partially, at least in some ways, at least some of the time. And it's sort of radically different way of approaching these kinds of issues.
Yeah, I like it. How can people get a hold of you?
So they can, well, first of all, they can go to the website, which is AgileBrain.com, and they can read up a bit more about it there. There's a whole lot available there. There's a profile of me under AgileBrain.com/science. They can get in touch with me, through the website. They can get in touch with me directly. That's jdavid.pincus@agilebrain.com. And, happy to hear from anybody. If they got questions and want to, chat, want to, do the assessment. The assessment, by the way, is for free and it's on our website. So anybody in the world can just take it and get an assessment done. One of the things that was really important to us is to not create unnecessary barriers to this. Like this is, I think, an important insight, a set of insights, and we want to basically make it available to as many people as possible.
Yeah, I'll put all that in the show notes too. Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
I mean, one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is just, the sort of the spiritual domain and how it's been kind of, we talked about this a little bit before about how it was sort of overlooked and almost sort of looked at it with suspicion by mainstream psychology and science in general as kind of like competition, like, oh, that's where religion lives. So therefore it's not a serious topic. And I think part of my struggle in kind of getting this model out in the world and getting it adopted is to just basically show people that these are not kind of like woo-woo kind of crazy ideas, that there's a very long heritage, both in psychology, in science, in philosophy, in religion, in all those areas that basically says we have a need for justice, we have a need for ethics, we have a need for a higher purpose. And it doesn't require any supernatural anything. Those are, if you want it to be supernatural, by all means, let it be supernatural. But the truth of the matter is it doesn't have to be. And it's high time that we as a society and as professions took that piece of our lives much more seriously, because I think it's the thing that ultimately matters most. It's the thing that really defines who we are as a person. And to kind of ignore it is I think foolish in the extreme. And I think that's what mainstream science has done for, I don't know, hundreds of years.
Yeah, I completely agree. I found out in my own personal life, once I took the spiritual side like more serious, that everything else seemed to fall into place.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It gives you the sort of master motive, and that's why if you end up with that sort of higher purpose, it then organizes everything else.
Yeah.
Uh, and it allows you to bring you to that top of that pyramid where all those differences collapse. That's the essential key. And I try to make that point also that my mother was a big believer in this. She was a therapist and she was into spiritual psychology and psychosynthesis. And she believed that the spiritual path was the only path. Like, you can try all these other things, but they're never going to get you all the way there. The spiritual path is really the only one that's going to actually, provide that sort of master plan that harmonizes all of your needs. So I think she's right.
Yeah. All right. Final question. What is one piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with about overcoming adversity?
So I think I'd go back to what I said briefly before, which was instead of looking at adversity like it's a particular thing, a particular relationship, a particular event, a particular challenge, look at it in terms of what it is that you need. Because sometimes adversity can be a thing you don't really even care about. Ultimately, it's not actually even on your path. It's like, someone it's like when someone is like screaming at you with road rage, it's like, how does that person's feelings toward me right now about driving have anything to do with the direction that my life is going? And people will get completely consumed in that. Like, that's adversity, and they'll get completely distracted. They feel like they're challenged. They got to rise to the challenge. They're going to go and get in a fight with this person. Something bad's going to happen. Someone's going to get arrested. Somebody's life's going to be ruined. It's like, no, that's adversity that you just don't need, right? It has nothing to do with your path. And there's a million examples like that. Like, this person was rude to me. My landlord did something I don't like. My neighbor did something I don't like. It's like, yeah, but is that thing blocking you from what you want to achieve? Is that going to help you meet your needs? Or is this just a distraction? And I think that's the most important thing, is to say, okay, I have these needs. These are unmet. Does this thing that seems like adversity have anything to do with that, with me achieving those goals? If it does, then yeah, you got to take that on. But again, there's other ways you can meet that same need that maybe don't require overcoming that much adversity. You can make substitutions. You can get, that satisfaction some other part of your life. But I think, again, the standard advice you get from any psychologist or therapist these days is, breathe. We're going to take a breath. We're going to that 6-second pause. And some magic's going to occur there. No, the magic that occurs is I'm going to think about what it is I really want to accomplish, what my needs really are. How do I prioritize that, and where does this fit into that? That's the part they don't tell you. That's what you should be thinking about in those 6 seconds. It's the content part. Yeah. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
Great advice. Well, JD, thank you for coming on here and sharing your insight.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Always fun to talk about.
Yeah. Well, guys, that's going to be all the time we have here today. Remember, the only way to get what you want is to go through the fire.
Absolutely.